Now I wish to invite our guest speaker. He is Shaykh ABDUL HAKIM MURAD. Born as Timothy J. Winter in 1960, he studied at the prestigious Westminster School in London and later at the University of Cambridge, where he graduated with first-class honours in Arabic in 1983. He then lived in Cairo for 3 years, studying Islam and traditional teachers at Al-Azhar, one of the oldest universities in the world. He went on to reside for 3 years in Jeddah, where he administered a commercial translation office and maintained close contact with Shaykh ABDUL HAKIM and other great ulama in Hadramaut, Yemen. Shaykh ABDUL HAKIM is the translator of a number of works, including 2 volumes from Imam Ghazali, In 1996, he was appointed University Lecturer in Islamic Studies at the University of Cambridge. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Shaykh ABDUL HAKIM MURAD as our guest speaker today. Takbir! 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 Risalah!
Bismillah'ir Rahmaan'ir Rahiim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin. Sayyidina wa mawlana wa habibina wa shafi'ina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Rabbi yassir wa a'in ya kareem. Waftah bil haqqi innaka al-fattahul alim. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل بفضل الله وبرحمته فبذلك فليفرحوا هو خير مما يجمعون. صدق الله العظيم. Verse has been going around in my head recently, which is the ayah which says, say, by the grace of Allah and His mercy, let them rejoice. That is better than what the people collect. So those short, pithy, general statements that repays close rereading. It's a commandment to rejoice at the grace and the rahmah, the lutf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala towards this ummah. One of my teachers, Habib Hamid al-Mihdar, rahmatullahi alayhi, wrote a book on the Milad which he called Al-Ihtifal bi dhikri ni'ami wajib. It is an obligation, and to use the Sharia term here, it is an obligation to celebrate blessings. Celebration, to express gratitude, seems rather a long way from legalistic commandments. If you think about it, every one of the commandments of the Sharia of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is nothing more than an opportunity for hamd and for shukr, for taslim, for i'an. Because لولاه لم تخرج الدنيا من العدم. Imam Busiri says, but for him, the world would not have been brought to non-existence. So the world and everything that is in it is an opportunity for shukr to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The culmination of everything in the created order is the one who represents all the qualities of perfection. Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Earlier prophets also represented perfection of Allah. Everything in the world, in fact, in some way or another, sometimes easy to discern, sometimes very obscure, shows us some of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But only the human order can truly represent them all. And this is one of the meanings, asbab, of وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا. He taught Adam all of the names. Angels didn't know the names. Apparently, a superior form of creation, capable of disobedience, engaged only in dhikr and ta'a and tasbih and tahdeed, but they didn't know the names. Adam knew the names, so the angels were commanded to bow down to him. And the one who wouldn't was the one who then said that if we had no money, I'll lead them all astray, except for your purified servants. And this, in the context of monotheism such as Islam, is something that needs careful pondering. We all know we bow down only to Allah. Prince Charles is reminded of this each time he attends some award ceremony, and he knows who Muslims are because they're the ones who don't bow or curtsy. But the angels here are being told to bow down to a makhluk, a creature, Adam, created of earth. They do so out of their obedience. But nonetheless, Tawheed is not being impugned. La ilaha illallah is still governing their actions. What they're doing is bowing down, not to the clay, but to this extraordinary still, the secret that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed in Adam and in his descendants. And that still which is represented truly in the qualities of the prophets or of the saints, the Siddiq, the Wali. Only a perfected human being, man or woman, can truly be merciful and just and gentle and wise, and all of the other qualities that the book attributes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Of course, when they pertain to a human being, they are, as it were, with small letters, not with capitals. Relative, not absolute. Signposts, not the thing itself. But only a perfected human being can truly represent those. And the one who is the representation of that Adamic perfection, the one who is the Lord of Allama al-Asma', as Mawlana Rumi puts it, is Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. We need to consider this very carefully, because as Akram al-Umam, the followers of his way, he is ultimately our model. وَلَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. There was ever an excellent example for you in Allah's Messenger. We see in him the manifestation of all the divine qualities, the names of beauty and the names of rigor, the names of mercy preponderate, but there is still an upholding of justice. Hence his ibadah, hence his jihad. It was not a way of pacifism, allowing others, the followers of the angel that wouldn't bow down, to rule the world and to conform it to that rebellious principle. The one who is truly the Khalifa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on earth is the one who represents the divine lutf, the divine jamal, and also the divine jalal. Anything else is a kind of idolatry. And that's why we hardly know what to say when we think on the occasion of the Mawlid of how to commemorate him. because of the extraordinary interruption into history that he represents. The fact that in a human being, these qualities of perfection, these caliph properties, can be genuinely seen. So he was the one who, as the hadith said, when you looked at him, he reminded you of God. Of course, we're monotheists. God alone is God. The infinite cannot enter the finite. But the infinite can, in this mysterious way, be pointed to, can be signaled, can beckon to us through the finite, through the signs that the world contains, through the beauties and the rigour of nature, from the Yorkshire springtime to the colliding galaxies. It is all ayat. إن في خلق السماوات والأرض واختلاف الليل والنهار لآيات لأولي الألباب. Truly, in the way heaven and earth were created, the succession of the night and day are signs for people who truly understand. Nothing is not a sign. We are believers to the extent that we can read the world. And as Imam al-Musiri says, Al-Ayatul Kubra, the greatest sign is the one who is the summit of creation, Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Now, one of the khasa'is, one of the qualities of the Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is that he is a blessing lil alameen. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. We have sent you only as a mercy to the worlds. And this alameen is the biggest term that the Arabic language can encompass, and really it means creation. All the orders of creation, not just the human orders, but the orders of jinn and of angels and the animal kingdom as well. On the Mi'raj, the famous hadith, when he comes to the Sama al-Dunya, to the lowest heaven, and is rising from the rock in Jerusalem to the very presence of his Lord, he said, تَلَقَّتْنِي الْمَلَائِكَةُ عِنْدَ السَّمَاءِ الدُّنْيَا وَلَمْ يَلْقَنِ مَلَكٌ إِلَّا ضَاحِكًا مُسْتَبْشِرًا يَقُولُ خَيْرًا وَيَدْعُو لِي. When I came to the lowest heaven, the angels received me, and every angel that received me was laughing. ضَاحِكًا مُسْتَبْشِرًا. It received the good news, because the final prophet had come. He was ascending to the unimaginable meeting with his Lord. يَقُولُ خَيْرًا وَيَدْعُو لِي. He would say something beautiful, each angel would say something beautiful to me, and would offer a prayer for me. So his arrival, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, is a mercy for and a source of joy for even the angels. They don't need saving, they don't need anything from us, but the mere fact of his beauty travelling to meet the divine beauty caused them to rejoice. And the jinn, إِنَّا سَمِعْنَا قُرْآنًا عَجَبًا. In the surah of the jinn, we're told, a group of the jinn and the ulama of tafsir tell us that they were jinn who were travelling from Nasibin. Said, إِنَّا سَمِعْنَا قُرْآنًا عَجَبًا يَهْدِي إِلَى الرُّشْدِ. We have heard an astonishing book, a Qur'an, which guides to righteousness. And we know that some of his khutbahs, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, were addressed to the jinn. This is not something that, in the normal course of affairs, we need know much about. The ulama have warned against that. But in the divine omnipotence, every civilization has known that the conscious order of creation does not include only physical human beings. Rahmatan lil Alameen includes also the animal kingdoms. And here we come across that wonderful genre of hadith, that group of hadiths which tells us of his concern, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, for the animals. Are we to have in these dumb animals, he was asked, ajr ya Rasulullah, a reward? And he said, وَلَكُمْ فِي كُلِّ كَبِدٍ رَطْبٍ أَجْرٌ. You shall have a reward for a kindness done to every living thing. Another famous hadith, traveling with his Sahaba radiallahu anhum, one of them had found a little bird, a baby chick, unable to fly, and taken it from his nest and took it to show to the other Sahaba. The Prophet ﷺ grew angry and told him to replace the bird in its nest. It's one of the aspects of his teaching, ﷺ, which most amazed and flabbergasted his contemporaries, the rough, heartless desert Arabs. Are we to be rewarded for kindness done to living things? Yes, he says. Another famous hadith. He hears a commotion in the city of Medina, and he asks what's happening, and they said, so-and-so's camel has gone crazy, and nobody can put a bridle on it. It's kicking, it's dangerous. So the Prophet ﷺ asks to be taken to the animal's enclosure. And they say, don't go in, Ya Rasulullah, don't enter. But he goes in to the animal's enclosure. And they watch as the Prophet ﷺ looks the animal in the eye and places his blessed hand on the animal's slab. Looks the creature in the eye, and to everyone's amazement, the animal becomes still. And when he leaves, they ask him what happened. And he said, this animal tells me that it was given too much to carry, and it was suffering. And when he explains this, there's another commotion, and it's the tears of the camel's owner, who says, Sadaqta ya Rasulullah, Messenger of God, it's true. The hadith ends with a happy ending, as the man vows never to use the camel for any work again, and gives it the best kind of fodder until the day that it dies. Rahmatan lil Alameen means also a mercy, therefore, to the animal kingdom. Something that today we need to pay close attention to in our age of environmental absent-mindedness, an age in which human beings are certainly more comfortable than ever before, probably not better than ever before, but the idea of progress probably seems rather less appealing if you happen to be a white rhinoceros or a hedgehog. Rahmatan lil Alameen. But of course, as we heard from the Nas, the poem of Imam Busiri, Muhammadun Sayyidul Kamnaini wa Thaqalaini wa Fariqaini min Urbin wa min Adami. Muhammad is the Lord of the two worlds, and of men and jinn, and of the Arabs and of the non-Arabs. And it's remarkable that a scripture that in some ways has resonances with the Hebrew Bible, the idea of a chosen people, is absolutely absent. The Arabs are nowhere mentioned in the Quran. The hadiths that speak of the fada'il of the Arabs are all weak. In Urbin wa min Ajami. And if you visit him in Medina sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, you will see written there, above the wajah, above his grave, those words. It's like his epitaph. The Arabs and the non-Arabs. It's to be universal. But despite its origins in a dusty corner of 7th century Arabia, it's going to work for everybody. So when it comes to Spain, it suddenly produces a great civilization. And great lovers of the Prophet ﷺ, emerged from Spain. Ibn al-Banna in Saragossa, Ibn Juzay in Granada, so many others, Abu Bakr al-Ishbili, all these mad writers proclaiming, singing their love of the Blessed Prophet ﷺ from the land of Al-Andalus. Many of them with Gothic ancestry or indigenous Spanish ancestry. It made no difference to the acceptability of the message of La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah. At the same time, at the other end of the great world of Islam, the souls of the Malay people thirstily drank up the same message. Wherever it has gone, its religion has proved equally appealing. Despite the serious duties that it requires of its members, people want it. So there are millions of Muslims in China, millions in Africa, millions in Russia. Throughout the world, millions upon millions of Muslims, particularly the weaker and the deprived. Because one of his prayers is that he prays for God to resurrect him amongst the poor. He himself was a man of the poor. Never would he go to sleep at night if there was a coin in his house or a loaf of bread. He used to tie a stone to his stomach out of hunger. Al-Faqru Fakhri, poverty is my pride, he would say. And this is also part of his status as Rahmatan lil Alameen, mercy to the world, especially to the poor. And this is something that comes from his ancestry, to Sayyidina Ismail, Nabiullah alayhi salam. That great story of the two sons of Abraham is one of the most prevalent stories in history. And we know as Muslims, because of our generosity, that we accept both the sons. And we accept the validity of the covenants that come through both of those sons. And we accept Sayyidina Ishaq and Sayyidina Ismail, Yaqub, Yusuf, Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam. Such is the hospitality of our vision, because of our conviction of Allah's mercy. A generous, loving God never discloses himself fully only once in human history. If he did, nobody could call him loving. But many, many, many episodes, each one as good as the other in terms of saving people. The salvation that Abraham offered to his people, that Jacob offered to his people, that Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam offered to his people, was the same salvation. وَلِكُلِّ قَوْمٍ هَادٍ. As the book says, for every people there has been a guide, and that is a necessary belief if you believe in a loving God. But the story of Ishaq and Ismail contains some subtleties that sometimes we disregard, because we say, yes, we accept both of them, two prophetic lines, two covenants. We tend to forget the meaning of Sayyidina Ismail as the symbolic ancestor of all Muslims. Allah is with the outcast, is with the alien, the one of mixed ancestry. He can be with the one of pure ancestry, the aristocrat, the chosen, the favoured, the fortunate, the privileged. That's not impossible in his generosity. There are cases of that, but particularly he is with the broken-hearted. As Allah says in the Hadith Qudsi, I am with the broken-hearted. That is where you will find him. Sayyidina Ismail alayhi salam, cast out with his mother, Bibi Hajar, into the wilderness. The rejected, the outcast, the ethnically incorrect, because Mother Hajar is Egyptian, which is not pure-blooded Hebrew, which is African. And in those days, the Egyptian was the very image of the non-Hebrew. For us, that has a particular meaning. It means that the one who will come, the only prophet who will come from the line of Ishmael alayhi salam, will be the one who stands for the poor, the oppressed, those who are the subject of the contempt of the complacent and godless world. Do not look for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the palaces, the wealthy. Story that I'm sure many of you know of Ibrahim bin Adham, one of the great early saints of Islam, how he repented. He was a prince of Balkh in Central Asia, a wealthy man, but nonetheless somebody who maintained the formalities of piety. And he used to pray regularly and fast and do his duty. One night he was awoken while sleeping in his comfortable bed by a noise coming from the roof. So he goes upstairs to investigate. And on the roof he finds a man sort of walking around, looking for something. And he says, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm looking for my camel." And the prince says, "Not only have you broken into my palace, but you're clearly insane as well. You don't look for a camel on the roof." And the man says, "Nor do you look for God in a palace." At that moment, the true light of Iman flows into the heart of Sayyidina Ibrahim bin Adham, and he exchanges clothes with this other man who's a rough, Qalandar, beggar type. And he vanishes, not to return to his palace, and he becomes one of the great callers to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and one of those saints who converted Afghanistan from Buddhism to Islam. And that is the way of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that is why in our day, when we hear so much grumbling about Islamophobia, we need to think a little bit before we join the politically correct chorus. If ours is, as I think people in most religions recognize, a basically distracted, materialistic, godless world, then for the mainstream voices of that world to approve of one's way of life and ideals would be an intolerable criticism. Nothing in prophetic religion promises popularity. We know that the experience of the Prophet ﷺ was that he was persecuted, tortured, his companions killed, chased out of the city which he loved, threatened, really threatened with torture and death. So Islamophobia is something that is natural. When it comes from a Quraysh type aristocracy, the wealthy, complacent power structures of today. But of course the world is not only that. Because part of the beauty of Allah's book is that it always adopts a balance. We have this category of Ahlul Kitab. And what does it say about the Nasara, the Christians? You'll certainly find that the closest of people in affection to the Muslims to be those who say, Inna Nasara. That's because there are amongst them priests and monks, and because they are not proud. So we have this very clear distinction between, on the one hand, the natural Islamophobia that will always come from the rich, the powerful, the worldly, the contemptuous, and which in a sense we welcome and are not surprised by and shouldn't be disturbed by. Inna kafaynaka al-mustahzi'in. Never mind the mockers, we are enough for you. And on the other hand, there's other families of faith that are also embarked upon the hugely difficult task of trying to maintain timeless monotheistic values in an age which really has no time for anything other than pleasure, selfishness, absent-mindedness, forgetfulness of death and all divine realities. And that's part of the beauty of his message, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Look how he receives the Waqf of Najran. Bishop of Najran leads a delegation to the city of Medina. And it's time for them to pray, to celebrate Mass, the sacrament. where should they do it? It's the Prophet ﷺ who invites them to his mosque to celebrate the sacrament in his mosque, the spiritual center of the Muslim community before the recapture of Mecca. Now that's the subtle distinction that the followers of Abrahamic religions have to adopt. On the one hand, no compromise of the truth. On the other hand, hospitality. And all of this comes from him, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, from his decisions, from his wise balance. Now, when we consider our situation as Muslims in a naturally uncomprehending world, I think we need to recall these lessons, and particularly the lessons of the first Hijrah. He chooses some of his Sahaba, those who had survived the persecutions in Mecca, but were nonetheless in need of protection, to leave the city and seek refuge in Al-Habasha, Abyssinia, ruled by An-Najashi, Christian king. And they go there, and there amongst them are Ja'far, that's Imam Ali's brother, and many of the early great Sahaba, particularly the weak and vulnerable, many women amongst them. And the Quraysh, the kuffar of the day, have pursued them. And the Quraysh, who have some lucrative trade arrangements going with the king of Ethiopia, want to put it into the mind of the king that these people are illegal asylum seekers, that they don't really have the right to be there, and that in their hearts they cherish contempt for the values of the country that has granted them protection. And in particular, although they have no time for Sayyidina Isa, for Jesus themselves, they say they don't really believe that Jesus was who you think he was. But the Najashi and his counselors, they summon the Sahaba who were in the place of the first Mahjab, the first Hijrah. And the Sahaba recite to them Surah Maryam. And the face of the Najashi is transformed and he weeps. Now that story is there to indicate the behavior of somebody who has really been transformed by the adab of the chosen one, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. What are they doing? They're respectful. They're in the land of Ahlul Kitab. They have something that is very much in common with the people that they have come amongst. They are not coming amongst just another bunch of Qurayshites. They honour the values and the laws of the place in which they stay, as the books of Sirah acknowledge. And from that time on, whenever Muslim jurists have spoken about what nowadays we call fiqh al-aqaliyat, the fiqh of minorities, that's the example that they use. Rahmated lil-alameen. It was a mercy to the world, even in that difficult situation of being part of an embryonic new absolute monotheism, seeking hospitality amongst members of an older monotheism. Rahmatan lil alameen indeed. So to come back to the ayah with which I began, rejoicing is in order. The rejoicing that the Najashi clearly felt when he saw these new monotheists come out of a place that hitherto had been interested only in bowing down to statues. The rejoicing that made his tears flow. The rejoicing that the angels felt. The rejoicing that the animals and the birds of Medina felt. And even this hadith, which is a sound hadith that I've come forward. إِنَّ أُخْرَى جَبَلًا يُحِبُّنَا وَنُحِبُّهُ. God is a mountain which we love and which loves us. And whose true meaning is then only to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This love, this joy, this hospitality all comes from this We know that Abu Lahab is in archaeology the only one in history who's definitely in hell. Even over Fir'aun, there are some people who argue it. Abu Lahab, the story of the Quran, is out of luck, the only one. And yet, we know from a hadith which is in Bukhari that when he heard that a new child had been born in his family, Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he, out of happiness, released from bondage a slave girl way back. And according to the same hadith, because of that, punishment in hell will be relieved on every Monday, because the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was born on a Monday. It was named the Amin, the year of the elephant, born on a Monday. So important is it to give thanks, shukr, for this ni'mah, that even somebody like that can experience some of its blessing. Somebody sunk in the depths of cruelty and torture and idolatry, recognizing no law but his own greed, can get something. So one of the great Shaykh Muhaddithin, Shaykh Shamsuddin ibn Nasiruddin, from the Middle Ages, reflecting on this, used to say, إذا كان هذا كافرا جاء دمه تبت يداه في الجحيم مخلدا وأتى أنه في يوم الاثنين فرقوا عنه للسرور بأحمد فما الظن بالذي قد طال عمره بأحمد مسرورا ومات موحدا. Which means, if that one was definitely an unbeliever, whose condemnation has come in the Quran itself, in the verse, تَبَّتْ يَدَا أَبِي لَهَبٍ وَتَبَّ, may his hands perish. So he is in hellfire. And yet it has been transmitted in the hadith that on the Yom Al-Ithnain, on the Monday, that punishment will be lessened because of his joy at the arrival of Ahmad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Then what must be the state of somebody who lived his whole life in a state of joy at Ahmad and dies in Tawheed? If that one thing from somebody so evil can make such a difference in the Akhirah because of a moment of joy at the Mawlid of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, then what must be the condition of somebody whose whole life was lived in that joy? That's the promise of the Milad and of the Mawlid. The ihtifal bi ni'ami wajib is indeed an obligation to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for his blessings, and ni'matul Islam a'zam ni'mah al-Isa'ah. Blessing of Islam is the greatest blessing ever to have descended in anyone's courtyard. So abshiru, ya ma'shar al-Muslimin. This is a time for rejoicing, time for seriousness, time for recollection, also a time for trying to conform ourselves to the great model which he represents. The message of the Milad is always a joyful one, but it has a serious aspect as well, which is that, as everybody knows, we are most inclined by temperament to obey the ones we love. The more we love somebody, the more inclined we are to go along with their wishes. And if we truly have this mahabba for the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the consequence has to be al-intizam, following in his footsteps, fulfilling his sunnah, and thereby joining the great caravan train of believers from his time down to the present who have preserved our doctrines and our form of worship and the deen of Islam intact. By his grace, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, jazakumullahu khairan, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Takbir! Takbir! Nara Risalat! Jashn-e Milad al-Nabi!
I would like to thank Shaykh ABDUL HAKIM MURAD for that very enlightening talk.